Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining PropTalk, a property management podcast powered by Resman. I'm Elizabeth Francisco. I'm president here at Resman, and I'm your host for today's episode. I am thrilled to be joined today by my dear friend, Kelli Dowdney, who is the Director of Operational Systems and Support at INDIO Management. I have known Kelli for what feels like forever, but at least a decade, and I have witnessed firsthand how strategically minded you are as an operator. I've also been able to see firsthand how owners and investors, how they've benefited from your approach to property management. And so I'm just thrilled to have this conversation with you. And, you know, I'm privileged because I know a lot about your personal story, your personal growth. And I'm just really thrilled that you're here today. So first, I just want to say welcome and thank you for being open to having this conversation with me today.
I am so excited to be here. Yes, you've definitely walked that journey with me. And, you know, I think that's so important to who we are as individuals and just as businesswomen and in our careers is, yes, I love talking about our industry, you know, the strategy and the approach, but also the story of our growth, because I think that's so important.
And you're a shining example because I can just say it, she's wicked smart, y'all. And I know it. I think you're one of the best.
Kind.
Wow, I do. I really genuinely, I think I've said this before, and I know as I've met some of the leaders of the companies that you've been fortunate to work with, I have no problem reminding them. It's like, I truly believe you're one of the best operators in the space.
Well, best is questionable, but you know, I think you learn and you grow and you self-reflect. You know, I'm definitely not without mistakes that I've made, but I'm better for it, and it's been a great journey. And this is just, it's a great industry to have a career in, especially, you know, I just have to pause and give a little Elizabeth plug because you've walked with me on that journey, and you've been, you know, one of my very first mentors, my friend, my confidant. And I think that's so important too, as you look at your career journey, is who do you have pouring into you? Who is walking that journey with you to pour into and to be that sounding board? I think that's super important to have.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Aw. Well, I've been privileged to be along for the ride, and you've been there for me too. So that's a two-way street, my friend. So I think for our audience, it would be great if we could take a minute and just tell them a little bit about your career journey. Like, how did you get, because we all have our stories, and at some point, I hope in our history and the evolution of property management, someday we get to a point where people's like, I set out to be in property management. But until that happens.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I love that question because I think it's important that we not just share what I call the elevator resume pitch, but that we share both our professional and personal growth stories. And as I said, you've definitely walked that with me. But, you know, my journey began, do I only have a minute? You said I have 1 minute.
No, you have as much time as you need.
Okay, because it might take a few minutes. But, you know, my journey began while I was attending Texas A&M University. And I had a great friend that played football, and during the summer, he worked at a property and maintenance. And he said, you know, I really think that you would be a great leasing consultant. And I wanted to stay and take some classes during the summer, so I started as a part-time leasing consultant. You know, I have to tell this story because I have several what I call aha moments.
Okay.
And it's really moments that defined my leadership and kind of who I am. And my first aha moment was when I was a leasing consultant, part-time leasing consultant. I had been working for maybe a week or two. And I remember calling my dad and I said, Dad, I'm going to quit. And he said, what? He said, why are you going to quit? And I said, Dad, there are two of us, two leasing consultants. Our desks are right beside each other. Okay. I said, and this leasing consultant that sits right beside me, she just won Leasing Consultant of the Year for this national property management company. I said, so every prospect comes in the door, like, I'm just trying to figure out what drawer is my, you know, my floor plan's on. And she's already like signing a lease with them. And I'm like, Dad, I'm horrible at this. I can't do this. This is not the field for me. And he gave me some of the best advice I think that he ever gave me. He said, Kelli, it doesn't matter what position, what industry, or what company you're in. There is always going to be someone who knows more than you, who has been there longer than you, and who is better than you. He said, you have a choice. You can let that deter you. You can let that hold you back, and you can let that intimidate you. Or you can seek those people out and ask them, show me what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really made a big impact of me as I went through my career, that not to be intimidated by people who are better than us or who know more than us or who have been there longer than us. Seek those people out and learn from them
Yep.
because
Amen.
they have a secret recipe.
Mhm.
And if you want to be good at something, and some of us are naturally, great. For me, I am not naturally great. I had lots of great people that poured into me. And it really came from that one piece of advice that my dad said, you can either let that intimidate you and you will always be in a constant state of, fleeing,
Mhm.
or you can seek those great people out and learn from them. That's what I did.
I think that's fantastic advice. And it's funny, I never really thought about it till you're sitting here talking and telling that story. I was thinking about like how I approach things in my career. And that concept of seek first to understand has been so critical in my own career journey. And it's interesting because even as we think about, as I've been through, 25 years of multifamily operations and now in the prop tech space, that the seek first to understand is something that is so fundamental and is such common sense to me. But it is something I think as people get further along in their careers, I think I've witnessed that not everyone keeps that same commitment
Mm-hmm.
and can almost fall into traps of success bias. And whether it's seeking to understand a specific role or a new company that you're in, understanding the devil's in the details, as Ann Sadowski always says. That's where I
Yes.
first heard it. So I always give her the shout out. But it's that need and that the benefit from understanding, and gives you the opportunity to learn from others who have probably been through what you're about to go through and don't even know it yet.
And I think it's so important, as we talk about the evolution of leasing
Mm-hmm.
and how that's changed with the pandemic and with this virtual leasing component that we all now face.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to understand and to seek. This is not an industry that we just prop up our heels on the desk and say, okay, I know it all. I'm there. I've reached it. It's that, this is a new landscape. This is a new environment. Now we've got different generations. We've got different learning. We've got different cultures. We have new technology that's emerging.
Yeah.
So I think it's having that humility
Mm-hmm.
and that humble approach and really seeking out people that you can learn from, that can partner with you and that can help you grow and understand.
Yeah. Well, I have no doubt that is really good advice for everyone that's listening, and implore you to adopt that, because you're right. It will make all the difference. And it also helps with the team camaraderie and just, we're all in this together. And I think that's one of the great things about our space and multifamily, even in the way we responded to the pandemic, just in general, is coming together as an industry, at least speaking for professionally managed
Mhm.
units. But I think it comes from that spirit that is what makes this space special, in my opinion, to begin with.
I agree.
If we go back to where we started our career in College Station, and now thinking about where you are today, kind of what has the career journey looked like for you to get into from a leasing agent position up into truly a senior executive role?
Yeah. So I started, I worked my way through all of the on-site positions. And then when we moved to Dallas, I had graduated with a double degree in marketing and management with a minor in finance. And to be honest, I really didn't think I'm going to have a career in property management. We were moving to Dallas, and I had taken a marketing position with a company here, and I met my mentor, Pat Holder. And when I moved to my next company, I moved with Pat Holder and took a training position. So I went from marketing to training. And I remember he asked me one day, he said, so what are you doing with your career? And no one had ever asked me that. I have to tell you that question really forever changed me. It was a complete mind shift. And through this question and many, many years of conversation, Holder continually, he inspired me and really is the reason today that I'm so passionate about vision casting with our teams and really talking about that word career. I followed Holder to several different companies in various positions. I did training, I did marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he and Michael Walker started their company, Walker Holder Residential, I joined them as their regional vice president.
Mm-hmm.
When I started, it's so crazy to think we were 38 units, one property.
Oh my goodness.
And then, over the years, when I left, we were over 15,000 units.
Oh my, yes.
And, I think that's where our paths crossed for the first time.
That's for the first time. One of our very first customers, not even on the Resman SaaS version, but on the the desktop that was
Yes.
was not meant for public consumption. They took that
For a
leap of
reason.
faith. Honestly, they were really, really good to us, and I can only imagine what it was like to work with them on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think that's, where I think my passion, initiated in my mindset of this can be a career.
Mm-hmm.
And really a large part of my leadership was Holder's approach with me of continually giving me opportunities and putting me in situations that I really honestly to this day I joke with him. I was like, I think for the first 5 years you probably believed in me more than I believed in myself. It was having those transparent, hard conversations with me,
Mhm.
but conversations that and that I learned from and I grew from, and I knew that they were having those conversations with me to make me better.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge part of my foundation. A lot of the things that I'm passionate about today, leadership and being a culture catalyst, really started in those early days in Walker Holder. My entrepreneurial spirit, my love for financials, my strategic approach to operations. I think this industry is so unique because there's not a wide margin from good to great.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is what we do is not rocket science. And it doesn't really take a lot more to go from a good operator to a great operator. It's being intentional,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
It's, I can remember when I started as a leasing consultant, I used to joke all the time, all I do is I show up and drive golf carts and bake Otis Spunkmeyer cookies. And, and through the years, through the evolution of our industry, with technology, with the new demand from our consumers, it has changed. When I was a leasing consultant, the environment in which they operate in today looks very different.
Yeah.
And through that change and that evolution, it's required us as leaders to lead differently, to train differently, to support our teams differently. And so that margin from good to great, it's paying attention to the details, right?
Yeah.
It's knowing what those KPIs are.
Yeah.
What are those key performance indicators that have the greatest impact on your financials? And then what are the driving factors that influence those KPIs?
Yep.
And then it's kind of taking a step back. And I remember the first time I heard KPIs, it was from Holder.
Yeah.
And he taught me why it's important to focus on key performance indicators and why it's important for us to train our teams to know what are the daily actions that they need to do to drive KPIs, and then where do they see the influences of those KPIs on the financials.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's dialogue that sometimes we, as leaders, we have a lot. Somebody comes into our industry and we train them on leasing and we train them on tasks that they need to do. And we need to do a better job of putting those dots together.
Yes.
Right?
Connecting the lines.
Connecting the lines, right? And so I was very appreciative of that experience, and that really cultivated the strategic approach. And it really made me very conscientious. It made me aware
Mm-hmm.
of what that deviation from good to great is.
Yep. I think that's a great point. And I'm glad that you brought that up because, we've had over the years, obviously, as we go out and we sell our products. And in the early days, I got to participate in a lot of trainings, and I got to witness firsthand the difference in approach between different leaders. And whether it's through the sales process as prospects, or maybe they were onboarding into our platform. And you're exactly right. It was surprising to me, and I don't know if it's the same today, but I can just say from my firsthand experience that I would see companies that didn't connect the dots for their frontline teams. It was just about that task management and not necessarily understanding the significance of those levers and what, the reaction to this action is and how it impacts the financial. So you were really fortunate that somebody was willing to invest in you. And I think that's a very strong message for everybody that's out in the industry. And I can tell you probably in the 2013 or 14, I remember coming across a prospect for our platform. And when we were, having the deep dive demo, one of the comments that always stuck out with me was that this particular company did not want to show the budget module that we have in our dashboard to their frontline teams. And that just blew my mind. And they wanted to restrict certain things from them. And it, when I was coming up, I remember hearing people kind of characterize what we did as, babysitting properties, which
Mm-hmm.
for anybody out there looking to invest or that has a management company or is engaging with your frontline teams, that couldn't be any
Far
further
from what we do.
from the truth. But there's people out there that have that perception. And that's why it's so important that you educate them on running the business.
That's
So,
right.
kudos to them for doing that. And then I know the impact that it's had on you. And I'm sure that you do that now going forward with your teams, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it is something that's such a basic, like when you know it, it's like, oh, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we get lost. I mean, and we get lost in our tasks. We get lost in, our meetings, our agendas. We just talked
Yep.
about that, right? That I think that's a important, and I've definitely been guilty of it. In 2014, I left Walker Holder. An opportunity had presented itself to join another startup company. And I have to say that the entrepreneur in me got the best of me. I had been with Holder for so long that I really felt that I needed to spread my wings. I needed something new. And, although I have to say, I don't have any regrets because I believe that my past experiences have shaped me into the leader and the person that I am today.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm really having a transparent conversation with you, the last several years, I've really struggled.
Yeah.
Personally, my 17-year marriage fell apart unexpectedly. I was trying to raise two beautiful children that I had adopted. And I was just really trying to find my footing. I was trying to find my new norm. And, during this time, I was really trying to find a career home. And, it's that saying that you never know what you had until you lost it.
Mm-hmm.
I think once I stepped into different environments, different landscapes, I really appreciated my journey and where I had been. And I think it cemented in me some of my passions and I learned a lot about myself.
That's what trying times do for us.
Yes. And not to turn this into a sermon, but you do know me. God really used this time to define number one and to speak into me and to challenge me of who Kelli Dowdney is.
Mm-hmm.
Who was I? And what was I created for, my purpose outside of my career? And I needed that because previously, I think really after my years, after my college years and the beginning of my career, my value as a person was directly linked to how other people saw me. It was directly linked to my title, my position, my status. And I think during the time after I left Walker Holder and I was going through these personal challenges, God really used that time to refine me. And if you think about a refining fire, a refiner's fire, it gets rid of all of the junk, right?
Yep.
And what it does is it separates the impurities out to where what is true and real is left.
Yeah.
And so, I know that that we had a lot of conversations during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back on that time, the different experiences when I really became passionate about cultivating my leadership.
Yes.
About finding a culture fit and being a culture catalyst. I realized that my value is not depicted by my role, by what others think of me. And I really had to get down to the nitty gritty of my value.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge shift for me because in that moment, I was also able to realize what I valued and what I needed. Because I think up until that point, it was I'm looking for jobs and careers and I'm not really thinking about, but what's a good fit for me?
Yeah.
Like, what do I need? What environment do I thrive in? What do I need to be in alignment with and what environment and values and what leadership do I need?
Mm-hmm.
And instead, I was looking at opportunities based on a various of things, And once I came to that realization of how important it is, I started interviewing differently. And I really stepped back and took my time to find that forever fit.
Yep.
And that's kind of the process I was going to. And really, to further the significance of this journey, in 2020, I had a life-threatening accident.
Yes.
And, I was on vacation and I fell 38 feet while I was hiking and I broke my neck.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually flatlined. And I think during my recovery, I think a lot of things were brought into focus for me.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that when I came back, that I not only wanted to find the right career fit, but that I truly wanted to make an impact. It was no longer about me. And it was so clear to me that I was seeking an environment with people whose values and whose vision was in alignment with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was longing for. And that truly was a game changer for me in my career.
Yeah. It's freeing.
It is. And
Free to be your best self. Giving yourself permission.
it is. And, you know, and one of the, I think my second aha moment that really plays into this, that really was brought into focus, is I can remember I was driving to work one morning and my dad called and he said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm driving to work." He said, "What do you think about when you're driving to work?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, Dad, I'm thinking about all the emails that I didn't get to and everything that I have to finish from yesterday." And he said, "Well, you already messed up." And I remember thinking, I messed up? How did I mess up? And he said, "Well, Kelli, how many people do you have reporting to you or that's under your direction?" And I told him, and he said, "So Kelli, when you get to that point, it's no longer about what you do. It's no longer about all the tasks that you check off. Yes, those are important,
Mm-hmm.
but when you step into a leadership position, your day must start not about what do I need to accomplish, but what do I need to do to make sure my team is effective." And, you know, I'm reading this book called The Multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
It's about leadership, and it's about how our society, our culture, our environment, we really are driven to be very selfish, very self-centered.
Yeah. Me focused.
Me focused, yes. And so what my dad was trying to say is that when we step into leadership, it's no longer about this task-oriented, I have to get this done. Our first thought when we wake up is, what does my team need from me to hit the ground running and to be effective today?
Yep.
You set them up for success. You multiply that effectiveness. You send them forth. And then, of course, we all have tasks that we have to accomplish.
Yep.
But it was, again, another mind shift change.
Yep. And you know, it's crazy about what you're saying right now, because I think that's a very strong message, because I think we can fall into that trap, like you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dedicated to your team's success and you do those things that you just talked about, you will find that your list, the very things that you know, initially getting so wrapped up in, those start to change.
They do.
And
Priority shifts.
yep. And you will find that you may not even have as much, because your team, you're empowering them to do more and to be more effective, which in turn can help you as leadership. And then you can maybe divide your time differently and maybe look for more opportunities, more growth for the company, think strategically, stay on task for the bigger picture that will then again ultimately help everyone in your team. I think too, if kind of adding to what I just said and thinking about it from a frontline perspective, I think one of the things that maybe was a career defining moment for me back, you know, this was a little while ago, but it's held true to this point in time. Whenever we'd bring new people on, like when I was a property manager, I remember first off, I went through the phases of, I'm going to do everything. I'll lead by example to the point everyone else will sit around and let me do it all.
Yes.
And so I had to learn that lesson.
Hard lesson.
Yep. That was
for those of us that are task driven.
Yep. And I did a lot of tasks. It was actually a maintenance supervisor who one day when I was venting about it, he's like, "Well, why should they? You're doing everything." And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to work anymore. But at some point, I started thinking about onboarding. And whenever we'd bring a new associate in, and, you know, it's one property in particular, 712 units. So pretty good size. And I just made it a mission to dedicate as much time as absolutely possible to every new hire that we had on site. And in reality, yes, I ended up working. I'm salaried, so I would end up working after hours. But what I started to see was that dedication to them in specifically that first 30 days, but, you know, it continued on. But the more time I invested in them in that first 90 days of onboarding, not only did it make a substantial difference if I were to compare the long-term performance of those team members compared to people who had onboarded a year ago, I mean, it was measurable about how effective they were, how successful they were. And then that benefited the property. And then that allowed me to continue to do more and even continue to grow myself. And so I think what you're saying is a great lesson. I think in property management, we know we're never staffed appropriately. And now with the great resignation and so many open positions, I can imagine we're in the same boat. You can get really overloaded with everything you need to do. And so you have this backlog of work. When you get somebody on your property, you know, you're looking at it as a release valve, when in reality it's not a release valve. You've got to give that new team member. And if you're
Set them up for success.
set them up for success. And same thing, if you're a regional and you're bringing those managers on, you've got to dedicate that time because it'll benefit you, it'll benefit them, it'll benefit the property, the company tenfold.
I feel like we could have a whole segment just on the importance of onboarding. And really, it kind of fits
Yes.
into this conversation so relevant because going through my journey and kind of where I'm at now and just the importance, and instead of being task oriented, and this is what I'm going to drive, and then shifting that to a servant leadership mentality and truly understanding the importance of empowerment and engagement. I was reading this Forbes article that said it was drawing correlations between just one associate that is fully engaged and empowered
Yep.
and one disengaged employee.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is that engaged employee contributes 627% more to that company's bottom line than a disengaged associate's contribution. That blew my mind. And it really challenged me of, okay, so if we know this is the impact
Mm-hmm.
that one associate has, how do we, number one, get them to be engaged
Yep.
and then keep them engaged? There's all these studies about direct correlation between engagement and empowerment. It is a circle. Engagement drives empowerment. Empowerment drives engagement. Engagement drives success, productivity. There's all these other factors that are affected and driven by empowerment and engagement. And then you start looking at it's what creates loyalty. That's what creates tenure. And so it really is, I keep using this word, but it's a game changer. And that really starts in the onboarding process.
Yep.
My teams have heard this 100 times, but I used to have it in dry erase, and somebody came in and erased it off my whiteboard, and it's now written permanently. But when we talk about, making sure that our teams are effective, there's 6 components that as leaders we have to pay attention to. And the first thing is leadership. Do they have the right leadership?
Okay.
The second thing is, do they know the expectations? And I think sometimes, I know I've been guilty of this. You hire a manager, you hire a regional, you look at their resume. Oh, they've been a property manager before. They've been a regional before. So what do? We skip
Yep.
really clearly defining those expectations.
Yep. That's a recipe for
It's a recipe for success. Because, what I've also learned in really reading and studying leadership is the difference between expectation and reality is disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
How do we as leaders ensure that our expectations and our reality are in alignment, collaboration, communication? And that's where I kind of went back and I said, okay, so we need to make sure they have the right leadership. We need to make sure they clearly understand the expectations. Then we need to train them on how to meet those expectations.
Yeah.
And then we need to make sure that they have the tools and the resources. We directly impact that as leadership for our teams.
Yes.
So if you're looking at performance and those 4 things are in place and you're still having an issue, the last 2 things is aptitude and attitude. Can they and will they? And no matter how much as leaders we want to impact that, we can influence those areas,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't change those areas.
Yes. I love that. I may have to have a permanent marker, even though we have dry erase boards all over our offices at Resman that clearly say dry erase on the wall so people know. Y'all might see some things up there permanent soon.
Yes. And so, and all of that ties back to that recipe and having those components of how do we get our associates to be empowered and engaged. Yep. And again, it goes back to what you were saying, bringing this full circle, starts at the onboarding process. So yes, I feel like we could have, I get very animated, as you can tell, and very passionate about that because I think that's a huge opportunity in our industry.
Yes. And I think you're onto something about that turning into its own conversation, because if we're thinking about the Great Resignation, and yes. I know money, it's easy to fall back into, it's always about money. And I know we're facing unprecedented inflation and I recognize that. But I also know there's a value to an employee with that, like you said, you can influence, right? The
Mm-hmm.
attitude, that
Mm-hmm.
aptitude. If they're wanting to grow and they truly are thinking about their career versus this is just a job,
that's
I
right.
think you get different outcomes. And I wonder if we're being transparent. I look back at Resman and I think about what we did right, what we did wrong, what we could have done better. as we were coming out of the back half of, I wouldn't say we're not done with the pandemic, but as things were kind of leveling out more
Sure.
from it, I think about how we were engaging, the ongoing engagement with our own team members, especially because we were full remote. And I wonder about in property management, where I think I read, and I brought this up on another conversation about NAA had an article where they were estimating churn in multifamily could have been as high as 70% last year, which is typically, I think 33, 34%, which is still really high for an industry.
That's
I
right.
mean, in the United States. And to be honest, I knew we had churn, but I didn't realize it was that high. But I know that was building, and it makes me wonder about what you're talking about. Those things that maybe we took for granted. It always comes back to the basics, right? But how much of what we're experiencing now could we have gotten in front of? And I think back to the first time that we really connected was in a session this is an old shout out to multifamily brainstorming
Oh
pros.
my goodness. Man, does that
Tammy.
bring back great memories.
Yes, I met a lot of great people. Those events have built long-lasting relationships, I have to admit.
Yes.
But we were on a panel doing a thought leadership discussion about complacency
That's right.
and how really that's the biggest enemy to our success. And I think what you're talking about, we can find ourselves becoming complacent, or we make the assumptions about our teams having that experience. I know we've done it. We've brought people in that maybe had prior experience. Maybe they were out on site and they used a different platform. Just because you know that platform doesn't mean you know ours, and so are we really dedicating to set them up for success? I think that's a great point. I think it's also a great segue, because we're going to talk a lot about, how do you, if you're a leader out in the industry right now, how are you making the most of this environment? What does that mean operationally?
That's right.
But the conversation that we've had thus far is so valuable and an unexpected bonus. So I thank you for that, because I do. I think you had some great insight, and I might have teared up just a little bit when she was talking. I know she saw it because she gave me the look, because I'm just so proud of you.
When you're in a journey, I believe I can remember going through some of my challenges and just being really discouraged. Like, this is not where I thought I would be, right?
Mhm.
Why am I going through this? I remember someone saying, maybe you're going through this because God intends for you to make your mess your message. And, I'm very passionate about what I do in this
No.
industry.
Nobody would ever guess
I
that.
know it's a shock, but I am. And I love what I do, but I'm going to be real. At the end of our life, I don't think God's going to ask us, what was your retention rate? What was your occupancy percentage? I think he's going to ask us, did we impact people's lives? And how do we do that? We share our story. I see this opportunity in this ever changing dynamic industry that we are in. And I
Yes.
remember being that leasing consultant and Holder asking me that question,
Mhm.
what are you doing with your career?
Yep.
Where would I be today if someone had not stepped in
And lean
and
in.
vision cast with me?
Hmm.
And so it's important for us to stop and to remember that we are impacting people's lives, and to vision cast with them and to pour in with them and develop and be that leader and be that friend, that mentor, impact people's lives.
Yep.
Whether that's our teams, whether that's our associates, whether that's our residents, our prospects. We have such a great platform to love on people.
I love that message.
And people are hungry for that.
I agree. I always say that's one unique thing, and even from our perspective, we look at our platform not just as technology, but we're part of the housing industry. We internally talk about, we always need to remember the people that use our software, what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're part of providing housing, and these are people's homes. It's not like anything else you can sell. Not even like other forms of real estate where it's a transaction, because people, that's their safe space.
That's right.
That's their home. It's their, their easy chairs. It's where they let the day's cares go to the side. And I just think that's it's a great responsibility. And if you can remember that, you can make a really great and living environment for the people at your communities and the people who work there. And it all goes hand in hand. So, I think as we're thinking about from a business perspective, the end of the day is these are people. We're in the
That's right.
people business. When I bring up what I do from outside the space, they're always, think about multifamily as, we build apartment communities, right? We manage units and we manage apartment communities. And I'm like, well, I kind of look at it differently. I always thought initially it's true we build apartment communities, but after that, we manage people. It's the residents that live there. And I think that's another shift in the mindset. And that makes that, that I think leads into what makes great operators is remembering that key aspect of it.
And I love what you said, the word experience. It's our consumers experience. It's the prospect experience, as we're going to talk about the evolution of leasing and how that's changed. It's also our associates experience. And I love that because we have an opportunity to impact, to create that experience. And I also think that that's why, you've heard this buzzword, servanthood, servant leadership is customer service is, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and this to achieve an end result, right? Customer service is very task oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you talk about service, servanthood, that's a state of the heart. You're no longer just going through actions.
Yeah.
Those actions are a result of an internal posture.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I haven't heard it characterized that way before, but I really like the way that you just said that. And that's a competitive advantage. Not to bring it back to the bottom line.
That is a competitive advantage.
But we're not in nonprofit housing. At least you're not right now.
No, I'm not.
So I think that's a great way to segue and start. Let's talk about what is it like? Because when we were prepping for this, I said, obviously I'm not in property management the same way that I used to be. And I do miss it. And, I always think there's something special that maybe when you're out on the front lines, you don't really appreciate until I know you start to notice it when you move up into corporate. And there's a lot of challenging things that happen out on site, but there's a lot of really great things that make for lifelong stories as well.
Yes. I always say that, we've seen all these different reality shows pop up. So whoever masterminds the reality show for property management, it's going to be, huge. And I want to be a part of that. So if you're listening to this podcast, please find me on Facebook or message me because I want to be part of that.
I know. Yes. There'll be some NDAs assigned, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, a lot, I'm sure.
For everyone that's involved. But I think, if we think about what does it look like today, like I'm genuinely curious about what is the environment like today? I mean, I have my perception and, I've talked to customers through the pandemic, and I think so much focus came back to our frontline teams. We've always been essential, but I don't know that as an industry, we really put the value on just housing's essential, but the people in this industry are essential to the housing. And maybe I'm just more naive or I haven't been in the right conversations, but I don't hear it characterized that way, or I didn't. But now coming, through 2020 and 2021, that was definitely the clear message. And I wonder, is that still the message today? Is, how has the, we're remote, we're not remote. How has the prospects comfortable, that used to want to come touch and feel, now that they're in the leasing cycle, which we're effectively already in,
Right.
and I understand that our data shows historically some of the numbers and what we've seen in the past have changed. But I can also tell you we're seeing, it's that time of year, volume is in fact increasing again, and started back in February and March. So when we think about the leasing experience and what is that like today, I'm curious, what are you seeing from the resident side, but also from the front line, from your site teams? Like, can you talk to us about what that's like today?
Yeah. And so, in preparation of this conversation, I really wanted to kind of get back and listen and find out, because I'm removed somewhat, being in a corporate position. And so I threw an email out to some of our associates, our Top Gun Leasing, had some great conversations just to see, because it's easy to say, this is what I think the temperature of the environment is. And then you realize that's not what it is at all. So, I really wanted to listen to them and then looking at some statistics too. I think two big drivers that's really dictating the temperature and the landscape of our environment, of course, is this COVID environment that was created and coming out of that. But two, just the technology age that we're in. And then you throw on top of that is, now we're adding conversations about AI and business information and analytics. So I think that that's a lot I think a lot of our conversation is a lot more data driven
Hmm.
and analytical. So I think those two components have really impacted our current landscape. And I kind of looked and, in 2020, multifamily saw an exponential growth in virtual leasing
Hmm.
because of the pandemic, right? Since in-person experiences were basically halted, that agent-led video tours saw an increase of 494%.
There weren't a lot of options at that time.
That's right. There was an interesting effect that it had. Our consumers realized and grabbed on to the ease and the efficiency of virtual leasing. So as we're starting to pull out of this pandemic, and you think about all the other industries and we have online banking, right? We have all of these self-service options that once we got thrown into that pandemic, our industry was thrust into that very quickly.
Yes.
But what are the benefits? The efficiency and ease has definitely ensured that is no longer just a pandemic trend. In fact, a recent poll showed that 68% of renters said they prefer to have a self-serve virtual leasing option.
Did they see those numbers maintain as offices opened? And I think our offices obviously were open to some extent, at least in our base. I know that our customers had their offices open, but I think as residents and prospects where they worked and whether or not that environment was open, I think probably, I would guess, had some impact onto their comfortability about how they would engage with their current property that they live at, their office team, or looking for another apartment if they so chose to move. So what did you guys see as far as the long-lasting impact?
I think that as the offices started opening up, of course, it was slow because there was still this unknown, right? And there was still this fear that kept, it's not like when our offices opened, all of a sudden the traffic shifted from
Right.
virtual to in person. So I think it gradually shifted. But also, I think it's important we have to consider the other impact, which is the growth of the transient population.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of our economy, right? And so we've gone through this pandemic. So we're thrust into this virtual leasing, and then offices are opened back up, but then our consumers see the ease and the efficiency. And then you add on top this transient demographic, right? And so the demand for virtual leasing didn't necessarily go away. It still
Right.
stayed there because now we realize this could be a solution. And now not only are we going to focus on traffic, walk-in traffic, curb appeal, our immediate comps, we realize that we can cast our net much further. We can reach that transient demographic
Mm-hmm.
through virtual leasing. They no longer have to be in our office.
Yeah. So
And the effect I think it's had on leadership alongside of that is I can remember, when I was a trainer, our training classes would be touring, right? Curb appeal,
Mhm.
demonstrating. So now we have a different skill set that we're asking from our teams.
Yeah.
Not only a different skill set, we're adding new technology, new tools and resources that are going to allow them to effectively have a virtual leasing program. And that's a different skill set.
Mm-hmm. So do you think, I'm curious about this. So they say it's 68%, which doesn't surprise me. Do you agree that, at least from your perspective and your portfolios that you've been engaged with, do you think they're still seeing 68% demand for virtual leasing? Is it solely self-serve virtual leasing, or is there some combination?
So I definitely think that some combination. I think that what he said is 68% of renters said that they prefer to have a self-service virtual leasing option. So what does that mean? And you kind of think about all of our different platforms and tools and programs that we have available in our industry. Virtual leasing is not just self-serving guiding tour. Virtual leasing is displaying our current availability on our website.
Mm-hmm.
It is being able to apply online. It is being able to pay those application fees. That's all components of virtual leasing.
Yeah.
No longer are we requiring our prospects to come into the office and turn in that application. Come
Yeah.
into that office and pay, give me a money order.
Yeah.
Or, now it is that online availability for efficiency.
Yeah. So when you were doing your survey of your team, and I'm thinking about this because of my own personal experience, I'm one of those people I wanted to see and touch it and could never have imagined moving into an apartment without seeing it first. Then, thanks to short-term rentals and Airbnb and that VRBOs, I've, over the years found myself vacationing that way, which is really a joke because anyone who knows Resmond knows I don't really go out that much. But the few times that I have, I've done basically sight unseen. And for the most part, I've been very pleased with the outcome. Then recently, up to like 3 weeks ago, we had to get out of our house for 3 weeks while we had some work being done. And so I had to do a VRBO. And this experience wasn't like the others. This is one I really wish I could have seen first. And then I was trapped there for 3 weeks. And so I wonder about, I can tell you in our data, we know, and our data would back that up. We saw a lot of self-serve and sight unseen leasing where we would see the online guest card and application, but maybe no face-to-face interaction. And so I wonder, do you think renters now, are they really still on board with I can lease sight unseen? And if you're coming from out of state, you probably have to. So I guess maybe a better question is, how do you get prospective renters comfortable with sight unseen leasing? And I'd say more than sight unseen leasing. I think it's more sight unseen move in.
I'm going to answer that question, but I think one of your questions that you asked previously was in listening to my teams.
Mm-hmm.
What are they seeing? And it's funny because I heard that our agents are finding through this shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
The impact it's had. If they've really had to improve and develop both written and verbal communication skills, on top of becoming more comfortable and being engaged with our technology tools and platforms. When you think about it, both of those are important in virtual leasing, right? On a physical tour, a prospect can experience your community, can experience and engage in all of the senses with their community, with your team, with that home.
Emotional connection.
So you lose that component when you shift to this virtual leasing. And so our teams have recognized, and rightfully so, that there is a greater need, and this was their words, for vibrant and descriptive dialogue. And then you add on the technology aspect and the skill set needed that our teams to be able to effectively provide this experience without them being in front of them. So it goes back to that, we talk about how do you engage them?
Yeah.
And so that load and that responsibility is placed back on our teams. Where, when you have a tour that's in front of you, you might not have to describe the feeling or the look or the aesthetics, or because you're letting that prospect absorb, right? And so then you have this virtual tour and that responsibility is placed on our teams.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up, you think about virtual leasing, this transient demographic. They're fielding phone calls. They're fielding emails, questions back and forth. So the importance for our teams to really develop oral and written communication, I think has really come to the forefront.
It's funny you just said that because I completely agree. And I want to hear, I'm sure you guys have some great ideas. One of the things that may help with that just came to mind is my favorite tool ever, which is Grammarly.com.
I was about to say Grammarly.
Grammarly. It is, and it's funny because, I know a lot of people that have the free version. Upgrade. If you want to invest in your career, pay for the professional version, because I was just thinking about some of the advancements they've made in that tool, and it allows you to set your tone. And what you said about vibrant descriptions and how you're communicating and telling a story and getting emotion, that particular tool now has settings that it will, you put your text in or however you're trying to describe the apartment or whatever the communication is. And if you've selected those types of settings, it will check the way that you're communicating to see if you are in fact doing that.
That's right.
And I know we talk about it internally for our teams here at Resmond. One of the things that I love about it works well in Google Chrome, which so does our software. So those two things will work together as they're emailing or texting prospects or residents. is utilizing something like that. So I'm a big believer. Apparently, so are you. So I don't know if
Yes.
you guys utilize it across the board in the company that you're currently with, but I'm a huge believer in it. That's a tool that is well worth the investment.
It is. We keep talking about previously in my previous life. I think we've all worked for organizations where we would have, and this worked. I think pre-COVID, this really worked. We would have templates.
Yes.
Use this template. We don't trust our teams to craft their own emails, so we're going to give them templates.
Mhm.
And my mindset, and now I think because of this new need, it kind of goes back to let's teach them how. Let's not fish for them. Let's teach them how to fish.
Yes.
Right. So if we know, and that's one of the points I have, is that we must recognize this shift and this need, this demand,
Mhm.
right, for effective oral and written communication. And as leaders,
Yeah.
we have to provide additional training,
Mhm.
tools, and resources so that we can support them and so that they can be successful.
I think there's a Kelli and E tour coming up
I think
through the
so.
associations where we may be tackling this subject.
It is such a great need. And it's, and that's one of the as we look at the evolution of leasing and just the dynamics of our
Mhm.
industry and it's changing as leaders, we talk about we're getting ready for TAA and there's all these great workshops and you're picking out where you want to go. And all of those are great with this additional need of this demand from our consumers for virtual leasing. I foresee there being, and maybe there even is because I haven't looked at the agenda yet, but we need to give them the tools and the resources to how do I have
Mhm.
an effective virtual tour?
Yeah.
How do I have, effective written and oral communication?
Yeah. Well, this is why I think you're onto something and why I joke about us having a session because I feel like we may be putting one together. Because I am hearing and I have seen some of the agendas, and there's definitely a need for having something that's visually vibrant,
Mhm.
that people can, you need to use the right technology to help people put themselves in the unit, in the community. They need to somehow still be able to feel what it's going to be like to be there. And I see a lot of focus on that, and we have some great tools for that. But I'm not hearing the conversation about that part, about what is it like to still communicate. And I can say that because even in our own base, when I occasionally get engaged or we're doing some product development, we get to see the communication logs and the way that some of our frontline team members are communicating, which can be very much like they communicate via text with their friends. And some of that's really enlightening. And that's why I think that there is a need for us to tackle this as an industry. And I think that's a lost art.
Yeah, because if you think about it, we're talking about engagement. We're talking about impacting experiences. And that communication piece is so very important.
And it's important for the career advancement. And I think that's one of the things I see is if you're in leasing and you're coming up through the ranks, understanding how you need to effectively communicate, tell a story, paint a picture, get to the point. I've been told about
Sure.
that in the past.
I think we need to take that class E instead of teaching it.
Well,
Get to the because I chase rabbits. I just yeah. So,
yes. Okay. Well, so we'll sign up for that one.
Yes.
But maybe we can bring the right people in to help with this. But I think when you're preparing and thinking about how you're going to make the most of this is not as a leader in multifamily right now. If you're a manager, if you're regional VP, or anyone above that, is don't underestimate the need for continued coaching about
That's right.
how you engage with the residents and the prospects and how to do that effectively. I think we're in a market now where there's market opportunity to grow rents, and we're seeing evidence of that all across the country. And I think you're seeing rents anywhere from 9-10% in some markets up to, I think the highest I've seen is like almost 50% is what their new market rents are. And so whether it's leasing online or in a virtual environment or you're in front of a prospect, how are you positioning your leasing teams to talk about rents and to sell what to some renters a significant increase from where they were looking 2 years ago?
Yep. And while the landscape of our industry has changed, one thing that is consistent is that it goes back to basics on this topic, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
is you have to build value. You have to build value in your product.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're selling apartments, whether you're selling llamas, or whether you're selling widgets,
or property management software, by the way.
It comes back to value.
Yep.
You have to demonstrate that value. There has to be a perceived added benefit in that consumer's mind that directly links to, yes, this widget is worth this value and I will pay for that.
Yes.
And so it goes back to our previous conversations of engagement, of demonstration, of connecting. That's why it's so important to have that effective, vibrant, descriptive communication, whether that person is in front of you or whether it's on the other side of your iPad or smartphone. It's connecting and it's engaging with them. It is building value into what we are presenting. That's an experience.
Yep.
It's a lifestyle. It is, and I tell this, I don't think this has changed either, even though leasing has changed. You can layer tools and platforms and resources and technology all day long. But at the end of the day, when that person is upset or has a need or has a question, it is a person that they come to. It is a person that they communicate with, and it is a person that is going to provide that solution. Our greatest asset are our people, period.
That's a drop the mic moment if I've ever heard one, because you are exactly right.
Yes.
And I think it's easy to, and I, like I said, love technology. We work really hard on our technology to make it as great as it could possibly be. But there is a human aspect to this.
That's right.
And think back to the experience I just shared with you about our 3 weeks in the VRBO there. And we did have a challenge or two, and not having any real people to talk to, having everything go through email or the online app was really frustrating. And I was only there for 3 weeks. I couldn't imagine having to be in that environment 365 days a year. And I think there's talk in the industry and people, have questioning or, thinking about the long-term advantages of technology being able to replace people.
That's right.
And I think that comes back to what you said. The competitive advantage is still going to come from your people.
Because how do you convey in your situation, how do you convey empathy? How do you convey compassion?
I can tell you it's not in the VRBO app.
It's not through emails, right? We cannot remove the human aspect from what we do on a daily basis, because the end product that we are selling, like I said, it's a lifestyle. It's an experience. That is highly emotional. That's a highly emotional purchase point. We cannot remove, and this is just, Kelli Dowdney's wisdom or lack thereof. I just don't think that we can ever get to the point that we remove that human aspect. Yeah. I think, and it said that, I have a data point somewhere that people, even though they might sign up and say, I'm going to do virtual leasing, they still want the human aspect. They still need that person, that name, right? That contact, that connection, and that, virtual leasing. But then when they move in, it's having that person that's going to be there for them if they need it.
I think you were onto something too, because I know we started the conversation about engagement with our teams, and then you've brought this up about engaging with our residents, and it comes back to that emotional connection, period. And when people are engaged and they're happy, then they're going to see the value, because it's what they would have to give up. And I think one of the questions I had for you, and we were talking about, every time we talk about the leasing cycle, it really becomes so focused on prospects and people coming through the door. But the reality is, to make the most of the leasing cycle is you want to have the highest renewal capture rate that you can, because that's how you protect the financial stability of the asset. And I think about engaging with our current residents and how impactful that is, and where we might have struggled with that because of sometimes going remote. I mean, I think we did a good job of trying to wrap our arms around everyone, but then where is it today?
And I've talked about my aha defining moments. And I have to share another aha defining moment. And it was one of my first properties I was a property manager for. And we had just had a significant 8% increase on renewals. I hadn't gotten any renewals. And I remember our office closed at 5:30, and my regional called me at about 5:15. He said, Kelli, you are not going to go home until you get X amount of renewals. And I was like, well, how am I going to do this in 15 minutes? And so, I had no idea what I was doing. So I said, okay, I'm going to just get my little notepad and here's the people the leases are expiring and I'm like, I'm just going to go knock on their doors. I am getting some renewals. So I knocked on the first door I came to and an elderly lady answered the door. And I said, Miss Johnson, I'm Kelli from the office. And I see that your lease is expiring. And I just want you to know that I would hate to lose you as a resident. What can I do to keep you here with me? We would miss you so much. And no lie, big, huge tears streamed down her eyes. She said, I have been living in apartments for 30 years, and I have always gotten letters that tell me when my lease expires and how much my new rent is and what I need to do. She said, not once in 30 years has anyone ever told me I would miss you if you left.
Oh.
And I'm just going to tell you, that struck a chord with me. That was purely accidental. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that I needed renewals. But I tapped into this secret sauce because we forget that people have a need to be needed and wanted and included. And that really did change my approach to renewals.
I love that story. That's a great story. You're full of drop the mic moments today.
Well, it's just things that grab my heart. I think we have to sit up and pay attention to because that's the good stuff about life, right?
Yep. And these are communities.
That's
Case
right.
in point.
These are people.
They're
These are
people
people's
in
lives.
communities. Yep.
And so going back to how do we operate and what does our approach, our strategy need to be? Yes, I think all of that's so important. And now we have tools and resources that tell us, where our renewal process should be. And we have all of these platforms to help us maximize rents. And yes, the strategist within me eats that up, but we cannot take out the human aspect of it.
No, yes.
That's how
agree.
we build value. That's how we achieve those results. This is because, it's telling us this is our opportunity, right? You have an opportunity to reach a 9% increase on rents, lease trade out. How do we get there? Yeah. It's not by our platforms. It's not by all of our technology. It's by our people.
Yeah.
That's how we get it.
Yep. No, I love that. And I think, it's funny, as we were prepping for this, there's a lot of stats and data points that you can get out of your property management platforms or your CRMs or whatever it is the tools that you're utilizing. And when we think about making the most of our leasing cycles, getting out in front of it and remembering what matters at the end of the day. And I think surprisingly from our conversation today, and I'm delighted, I think hearing it come back around to it's more than just, do you have an engaging website? You need to have the engaging website. You need to have the engaging tools.
That's right.
But I think as we look to adopt technology, we can't lose sight of the impact that one person can have on another. And, the market is good now. We've had a lot of unexpected success, I think, coming out of the pandemic. We're very, very fortunate as an industry that our renters were able to get the assistance they need when they needed
That's
it.
right.
But we also know things are cyclical. We also know that we are still having a very competitive environment as far as leasing. And we also, as we're looking at rent growth, which is pretty unprecedented right now, the one thing that nobody's talking about is the expenses are also pretty unprecedented right now. Right? And
yes.
And the media we don't seem to see that coverage out there at all. So I think
we're in the shortage of supplies, which is what's a major factor driving those expenses.
Yes, which to me signals the fact that you definitely want to keep as many renters in those units as you can, especially if you can't get the supplies to turn that unit.
That's right.
But as people are looking at where are we going to end the year, what's the back half of 2022 going to look like, where are we going to end, how are we going to, what's the launch pad going to look like for 2023? If you really want to have that competitive advantage, it is getting back. And I've heard this, it's funny, 4 economic downturns. It always comes back to the same sentence: get back to basics. That has not changed. The tools in which we're utilizing to move ourselves forward and to help us stay focused on basics. Maybe that's what's in the magic sauce.
In this emerging environment that we have with new technology, new tools, and new platforms,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, who's picking up and utilizing those tools and
Yep.
platforms? It's our people.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
can.
as leaders, new tools, new platforms, dynamic environment. How are we changing as leaders to support them,
Yeah.
to train them, to lead them? It's a great pulse check for me is, as I was reaching out to our on-site teams and I was getting their feedback, my whiteboard, whole left of my whiteboard is now, tasks of, okay, well, I heard this and I heard this, and how are we going to adapt and change? What does our response look like
Mhm.
to listening to them, to listening to those challenges, or listening to their needs, and how do we adapt not only our business plan, but our leadership and support plan, our training programs? It's across the board.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point. How do you bring it back around full circle? And how are we investing back in our people to empower them to be the very best that they can be?
In light of what you said several times, the great resignation.
Mhm. Yeah. Well,
That adds multiple layers of challenges and really solidifies the
mhm.
importance.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm delighted that our conversation has, steered back around and has had so much focus on the people in this industry. Because one of the things I fear is that sometimes when open positions stay open, and especially as we get into the later part of the summer, then you start looking at budgets and, how are we hitting or exceeding our financial goals through timing of hires, timing of onboarding, or do we start looking at positions and think about, well, what does the long term need to look like? Do we need to look at pulling back on staff? And I worry that sometimes I hear this, I'll just tell you in different conversations about, well, if we get this savings, because we hear it when we're positioning Resman, if we're going to give you 4 hours back, per role per week, I've been in the room where that can turn very quickly into, well, that's going to be an immediate cost savings on our budgets. And, because they're looking at how we're going to cut bodies.
That's all right.
And I, as an operator, cringe. And if I'm present, I have no problem chiming in because I really think I don't know anybody in this industry that has enough time to do everything they need to do to truly maximize every opportunity in front of us. And so it's really about using tools the right way to give time back and capacity back to do the things that ultimately do improve the bottom line. And so I thank you for having the forethought to bring that conversation and keep it focused in around the people, because as a good strategist, that's why your properties perform the way that they have and do.
Well, it is. It's definitely about the people, and as I alluded earlier, that's been a journey. That you in a mindset shift that I've been carried through, and we learn from our mistakes.
Mhm.
We grow. We learn from our experiences. And as long, I think one of the things we talked about earlier was just complacency and not being complacent. Whether you're a leasing consultant listening to this, or a tenured regional, or what have you, don't be complacent where you are, and continually look. What does tomorrow look like? Where do
Mhm.
you want to be? How do
Mhm.
you get there? And if you don't have someone pouring into you, find someone.
Yeah.
Right? Find someone to walk that career path with you to help you grow. If you don't know, if you want more, but you don't know how to get there and you don't know what you need to do to grow, then ask someone.
Mhm.
I mean, there are so many great dynamic leaders in this industry that we love to share our story and we love to pour into people.
Yep.
And I think it's even more important now, just with all the different dynamics that we've visited about today between, the economy and the landscape and the technology and the people and the new skill sets that are needed, is to find someone to partner with you on that journey
Mhm.
and never stop growing.
I agree. Amen to that. So, well, it went by super fast. This might be the fastest one yet. But I just want to say how much I've enjoyed getting to catch up with you and to have you join us today. And it is weird to put a microphone in front of you and not let you sing. But for those of you who don't know, she's an amazing singer. So maybe we need to work on that next time. So I
Well,
just want to say thank you and how much we appreciate having you on our Prop Talk today.
it has been a pleasure, a joy, Very inspiring just to be able to sit down and talk and banter. And, I don't think I've ever walked away from a conversation with you that I did not feel energized. And I love that when you find people that challenge you and that grow with you and that you can bounce ideas off of. And that's the secret sauce, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to join you today.
Well, thank you for coming. Well, with that being said, I hope everyone that is listening to this episode has enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully, you've taken away some wonderful insight and are maybe thinking a little bit differently about how you can engage with your teams to make the most of not only the leasing cycle we're currently in, but ongoing, so that you can maximize the opportunities for your team and for your owners and for your company overall. So again, be sure to subscribe to Prop Talk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And to learn more about Resman Property Management's platform and to get more insight on the multifamily ecosystem, please visit myresman.com. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.